Hi, so I've had a few requests from students asking me to do a tutorial about how to approach an unseen text and then to kind of link that into how to structure an essay response to this part of the exam paper, so the first section of paper 1 on your LangLit A-level course. So before I talk about the process that I want to teach that I do teach my students to do, I just wanted to say that there are so many different ways that you could approach this, and your teacher no doubt has taught you a completely different way to do it, and I'm sure they're all valid. So feel free to just go ahead and carry on with whatever kind of system you've been taught. This just happens to be the way that I teach my students to do it, and feel free to use it if it's helpful. So the first thing that you need to do in the exam is open up and read the question. It normally gives you a little focus, and then you need to look at your parrot book text and your unseen text and identify the gap. So that is the genre, the audience and the purpose of the two texts, and this is really your starting point and should form your opening paragraph. So the genre is the type of text. Is it an autobiography? Is it a diary? Is it an opinion article? Is it a review? Who is the audience? Is there a general audience because it's been published in a broadsheet newspaper? And then also, is there a more specific audience because of the topic that's explored? You also need to consider what the purpose is of the text. Is it there to inform, to entertain? Is it there to persuade us of that writer's particular point of view? Once you've identified those things, and make sure you read the bump, the little bit of information in italics that comes before the text, because there are often some key pieces of information there that you will need in order to write your essay. So start there and then do a first read through and identify the gap. After you've identified the gap, you're going to identify the big fish, so the big picture of the overall voice of the text. And let me just explain what I mean by that in a little bit more detail. So this is a little bit of a cringe analogy, but it's a useful one, okay? So when they used to satirize 90s ravers back in the day when I was young, there used to be a dance that they described them as doing that were big fish, little fish, cardboard box. Okay, so you can think about this dance in your exam, because you need to start with the big fish, your big picture conceptual understanding in terms of describing the type of voice that is created. Only once you've established that big picture can you zoom down to look at the literary and linguistic details. Okay, so your point should not be starting off with at the semantic field that's created or the imagery. Your point should be that the voice is exciting or solemn or somber or whatever it is. It could be anything, but you start off with that big picture, and that's the first thing that you identify in the exam. And you've got your big fish and you've got your little fish, and inside the cardboard box is all of the terminology that you need throughout your essay, which I'm going to talk to you about later on as well. So here is that big fish that we talked about. Okay, this is your overall big picture stuff. I tell my students to come up with at least 5 adjectives to describe the type of voice that's created in the text that they're reading before they move on to do anything else. Only once you've done that do you move over to talk about these little guys, the little fish. And these are the details, the literary and linguistic devices that shape the overall meaning of the text. Now, you also need to be careful when you're looking for these little guys that you are picking the most pertinent and important literary and linguistic devices that are in the text. So in the past, I've had students write me a 2.5-page essay on voice, and a whole side of that essay was about the pronouns that were used within the text. Now, I guarantee you that wasn't the most important way that the writer was shaping meaning within that text. So you need to be, particularly to get into bands 4 and to bands 5, you need to be discriminating, you need to be critical, you need to be able to evaluate. And part of that is being able to read through the text and being able to see which are the most important ways that the writer shapes their voice. So the example that we're going to look at is quite solemn and somber, and how do those literary devices create that solemn and somber tone? Okay, be selective in the way that you choose those little fish as you go through. Now, once you've identified the big fish, this guy's AO1, you've identified these little fish, they are AO2, you then, at the end of your essay, should try and link that back to the gap. So really, I tell my students that their point is the big fish. So one way that the writer, one type of voice that is created in the text is a solemn voice. Okay, there we're hitting AO1, and then once we put a quote, we would then go through and analyze it using all of our lovely terminology, and pick apart how that solemn voice is created with those literary and linguistic devices. Once we've done that AO2 analysis, you can then come back to the gap. So, okay, how does that fulfill the genre conventions? How does that engage and interest the audience? How does it fulfill the writer's purpose? Now, you don't need to be that formulaic in your writing. You know, have very bright students who just hit assessment objectives in a different way. But if you're looking for a formula, for a way to approach scaffolding each paragraph, you start off with a topic sentence that's about the type of voice that's created, you find quotes to back that up, you do your AO2 analysis, you pick apart the quote, and then after you've done that, you link it back to all parts of the gap every time. But in order to hit that bit of the assessment objective, you do need to be showing an awareness of that as you go through. So what I've done next is I've got a specific example for you that I've kind of modelled how I would go through and use this process with a specific text.